Hey knitters, it's Lindsay. Today I'm going to demonstrate the short row triangle from Pitch Cowl by Knit Eco Chic. Before we begin, I wanted to show you the finished cowl. It's worked flat and then grafted. That's the first triangle. And then working just this half of the stitches, you work your stripes, and then you work your second triangle using short rows. And then you work your stripes and you graft it. So on the second triangle, I'll pull this quite wide so you can see. What looks like a row of stitches is actually 2 rows of wrap and turns, where each stitch is wrapped twice. I've created a super small sample here using some leftover 100% linen Eco Stitch sport weight yarn. This is lilac gray and royal purple. So I've created triangle 1 and then done 2 stripes, and I am currently in triangle 2 section of the pattern, and I'm about to work the first wrap and turn on row 1, which is a wrong side row. So I pattern to the last stitch and wrap and turn the last stitch. Row 2, pattern to 2 stitches before your stitch marker, K2 together. One more note before I go further. You'll want to take note of how many stitches you start with on triangle 2, because you know you've done triangle 2 correctly, because at the end you'll have the same number of stitches as you did at the beginning. I began with 10 stitches in the royal purple color. And in the pattern it calls for a cable needle because you're cabling more than the 2 stitches, but I tried to make the top edge proportionate to the sample size. So row 3, pattern to 1 stitch before your previous wrap and turn, and wrap and turn. Always making sure to cross your yarn whenever you switch colors. And that was my previous wrap and turn. This is 1 stitch before it. So I will wrap and turn this stitch. And if you have a hard time remembering which is your previous wrap and turn stitch, you always use a locking stitch marker. And that way you don't have to read your stitches. But if you look at the front, you can see where the wraps are too. It's another option. So repeating row 2. Repeating row 3. Thanks to my locking stitch marker, I know that this was my last wrap stitch, so this is the one before it, which is the one I'll be wrapping this time. So wrap and turn, move the stitch marker. Place the stitch marker. And repeat row 2. I'm going to jump ahead here to the final row 3. I'm on the final row 3, and that was my previous wrap and turn stitch, so I'll be wrapping and turning this stitch, slipping off my stitch marker. Now I know it's the final row 3 because I have 3 stitches left unworked before my stitch marker. So knit 1, K2 together, and pattern to end. That concludes the first half of the triangle. You can see that I've got 4 stitches wrapped here and 2 stitches unwrapped. And on the bigger sample, you can see that this entire row has all been wrapped once. Moving on to the second half of the triangle. And you want to leave your wraps in place in order to mimic the look of a stitch when you don't have it stretched out like I do for the sample. But it'll look like a center vein stitch mimicking triangle 1. So, purl 2, wrap and turn this first stitch. It's the first stitch that has a wrap and turn on it. And again, you may want to place your locking stitch marker if you have a hard time reading the double wraps, just so that you know where you're going to on the next time you're on a wrong side row. So K1, make 1, K1, and pattern to end. Row 7, pattern to the previous WT stitch, and I know which stitch that is because I used the locking stitch marker. But if you don't use a locking stitch marker, you can see that there are 2 wraps on this one stitch. That's one wrap, and that's the second wrap. Purl it and WT the next stitch. Before you slide it back, slip your marker on. That's why I recommend a locking stitch marker, so that you're not constantly slipping back and forth if you forget to put it in place. Pattern to 1 stitch before the marker, make 1, and pattern to end. Repeating row 7 again. Pattern to your previous WT. as the previous WT, and you can see the double wrap. Here's the wrap we just made, and here's the wrap that was made the last time we're at this spot on the first half of the triangle. So purl it, move your locking stitch marker, WT the next stitch, and pattern row 8 to end. So the final time on row 7. Pattern to your previous WT stitch and WT the next stitch. Again, if you didn't use your locking stitch marker, you could tell that this was the last stitch to be wrapped twice. There's the first wrap and there's the second wrap. And if you rotate it, it looks like a stitch to mimic triangle 1. So purl it, move your locking stitch marker, and WT the last stitch. And pattern to end. And there you have your short row triangle. Now it's a very tiny one, so I will hold up the larger sample. Which you can see my arms aren't quite long enough. You can see the short row triangle, which was worked sideways using wrap and turns, going all the stitches up, and then your second half working back, wrapping and turning all the way back down to the bottom. There's the whole triangle. So, and the quick verification you've done it right is I said write down how many stitches you started with, and I started with 10, and we'll see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yes, I did do it right. And if you forget to write down how many stitches you've got, you can always look at the second half of triangle 1, because that's what you'll be grafting it into after you finish your stripes. Thank you for watching this tutorial on the wrap and turns from triangle 2 in Pitch Cowl by Knit Eco Chic.